It is 11 o'clock Sunday morning, April 19th, 2020. Good morning to you. Hope you're well wherever you are. It's a beautiful morning in Salford in Greater Manchester in the northwest. It's looking pretty nice. Hope you've had a good weekend. Thanks for listening to Sunday View. You can tweet me right now. The Twitter handle hasn't changed. You know what it is. Going to look through the papers and we'll listen to the talk shows as well. We'll have a chat, you and me, this morning. Always good to be with you, so it is.
It's the BBG, not the BBC. You're listening to the Richie Allen Radio Show, live from Salford in Greater Manchester.
It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Coronavirus, schmoronavirus. There's no getting away from it, really. So the newspapers then this morning, that's just 86. Love my Americanisms. Let's 86 the music. What does that mean? If you're listening to this in the US, I've never looked it up. Where does the phrase come from? 86 something, to get rid of something. You've got to help me out. Tell me, tweet me. Little bit of mindless trivia this morning. Trivia that doesn't mean anything. But yeah, I 86'd the music. Yeah, well, it feels like we're living in our own episode of The Twilight Zone, doesn't it? Or Black Mirror. It feels like it, that we're now in one of those episodes. What was once the stuff of screenwriters with very vivid, maybe even wild imaginations, is now your reality. My reality too, because we're in it together, you and me. We're in it together. So we are. Did you see the massive mind control going down last night, did you, on telly? You know, there was a time when I would be a little bit reticent to use sweeping terms like mind control. Because I suppose the independent media or the alternative media, there are certain cliches associated with it, with the genre. Mind control. But it was. I'm not so worried anymore. I'm not so reticent to use these terms, to use the vernacular. Because it was mind control last night on television. Lady Gaga. That's appropriate. Isn't it? Paul McCartney. Don't start with that, you big baldy bastard. No, I won't. I don't believe the Paul McCartney conspiracy theory. I think it's the most ridiculous of all the conspiracy theories that I've ever heard. That Paul McCartney was killed and was replaced with Paul McCartney. But there are people who believe it. And they point to the Abbey Road album and all of that. Anyway, look, enough of that. That's what I do, you see. I forget where I am and I start going off in tangents. I get accused of it all the time by my peers, and they're quite right to accuse me of it. So the biggest names apparently in music, or some of them, got together last night to put on a concert from their houses, from their kitchens and their dining rooms and their bathrooms and their living rooms and their snugs. Some of the best in the world performing songs, and as I said, from these rooms because of the coronavirus. The Rolling Stones managed to do a couple of songs from 4 different locations. Brilliant. It was 8 hours long, apparently. I looked at bits of it this morning. It was Lady Gaga's idea. Again, that's pretty apt in these mad times. Lady Gaga. She said it was a love letter to the world. Do you feel great this morning now? Did you get up this morning feeling really loved and you couldn't understand why? You just felt warm. Well, it's Lady Gaga. You have her to thank for it. Why do I say mind control? Well, the concert, the madness, was titled One World Together at Home. Right. And it was organised by the Global Citizen Movement and, importantly, the World Health Organization, the Global Citizen Movement. And this madness began with a montage, I suppose, of people under lockdown clapping like this, like fucking Egypts. for the healthcare workers around the world, not just in the UK now, but in France and in Spain and Italy and all the rest of it. So that's Andy Warhol again. In the future, everybody will be famous for 15 minutes. This lockdown, you spend some of your day, if you're me, looking around social media to grab some bits of audio of interest, to grab some video of interest. And increasingly, you're finding that ordinary people... Now, I consider myself to be an ordinary man. I'm not a celebrity. I'm reasonably well known in some places, but I can't get recognised in my own street. I'm not a celebrity. But what I find is, increasingly, ordinary people like me are, and this is happening more and more and more and more, are looking for ways to get picked up by Twitter or by Facebook, or to get picked up by the Daily Mail or the Sun or the Star. Gombeans, as we would call them in Ireland, are doing things like taking their rubbish bins out dressed as the village people during the lockdown in the hope that it'll be picked up and played on Piers Morgan's show or played on good Sky News or something. It's a wonderful... It must be... We often say this on the programme. This must be a great time, for academics who study people. Anthropologists, they must be having the time of their lives watching people. How the mind control is affecting people. Everybody wants to be famous. Mythomania, which I talked about often on my programmes over the years. Mythomania, the condition of seeking to convince the world of your worth. Now, there are 3 or 4 definitions for mythomania. If you put mythomania into a search engine, you get 3 or 4 definitions. My definition for mythomania is somebody trying to convince the world of their worth or their importance. And Christ is the world infected with mythomania now. It's an incredible thing for me to witness. It really is. It's despairing. Equal parts despairing and sometimes hysterically funny. And you see it with the clapping. People clapping like fucking idiots on a Thursday like this, or banging pots and pans on their front doorsteps, hoping that local media is filming it, or that their own films of themselves clapping, because they film themselves clapping like fucking idiots, and they put that online and they hope it gets picked up by the news bureaus. It's insane. While they're doing all of this, of course, their civil liberties and human rights are being stripped. Right? To the bare bones. It's amazing. So you had Global Citizen last night. That's who organised it. Mass mind control. No Irish, no English, no Azerbaijanis, no Turks, no Aussies, no Iranians, no Russians, no Yanks, no Palestinians. In the end, there won't be a nation state to call your own. It'll be global citizen, global governance. It's a mass power grab, this. Mass mind control, change in people's minds by telling them that they're at war with a virus, an invisible enemy. You got to change, radically change everything about your life and how you see the world and your own place in it. It's mad. 9 minutes past 11. Anthropology, that's the place to be, I think. And in the Sunday Observer this morning, before we start hearing a few voices, Entschuldigung, in the Sunday Observer this morning, there was an interesting article. Police chiefs have actually come out over the weekend to tell the public, come here, will you stop ringing us up, dobbing in your neighbours, will you? This is true. Police chiefs who want us to be dobbing in our neighbours. These are the people who came up with hate crimes, you know. Listen, we want you to tell us about non-violent crimes or non-crimes. We want you to report non-criminal activity, like hate crime. Remember the South Yorkshire police, remember that? They said if somebody misgenders you, we want to hear about it. This began before the coronavirus. And then during the coronavirus, they were saying, we want to know about the people breaching the guidelines. the feckers that are going out more than twice a day. But now the police are saying, will you stop bringing us up to shame your neighbours? We don't have the capacity to deal with it. 2,000 calls in one day. West Midlands police got 2,000 from snitches ringing them up. How are you doing? Is this the snitch department? It is. It is. How are you? I don't want to give me name now, and I don't want anybody to know it is me, but my next door neighbour keeps going out all the time. Oh, Jesus. Mad. Let's look at the front pages of the newspapers. It's positively an episode of The Twilight Zone or Black Mirror. Sunday Telegraph, Johnson starts to take back control is the headline. He's at Chequers, his retreat, and apparently he's back in the game now. The Sunday Times, ministers plan for schools to reopen in 3 weeks' time is the headline. Also on the front page of the Sunday Times is this: revealed how the government sleepwalked into pandemic catastrophe. How the government sleepwalked into pandemic catastrophe. We'll come back to that in a minute. On the front page of the Mail on Sunday, get Britain moving again. Now that's the same as the initial story on the front page of the Times, the notion that in 3 weeks' time schools will be opened and will slowly start to get back to normal. Is that true? Well, Sky News sought to find out if it's true or not. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Michael Gove, was on Sky News this morning with Sophie Ridge. And Sophie says to him, she says, come here, Michael, is it true that the schools will open in some way in 3 weeks' time? Here's Michael Gove.
No, it's not. It is the case that we are looking at all of the evidence, but we've set some tests which need to be passed before we can think of easing restrictions in this lockdown. It's very important when we're still in the process of making sure that we can reduce the rate of infection and also reduce the number of deaths, that we maintain the steps that we have. Now, of course, we're looking at the data. It is the case that the rate of infection appears to be flattening, but we do not want to take steps too early, because the most important thing is to make sure that the NHS and the public's health is protected.
You can tell that people agree with that assessment. That's why so many people are obeying the lockdown, staying at home to try and protect the NHS. But if we're looking at a kind of roadmap, if you like, out of the lockdown, which many people would like to see, it's been a difficult period for many people already. Is it right, the broad brush direction, for example, that schools and nurseries may be one of the earliest things to open?
No, I think it would be wrong to get ahead of ourselves here. It is the case that if we manage to ensure that the rate of infection is kept low, if we can see the rate of deaths falling, if we can make sure that the NHS's capacity is as strong as it can be, then we can think about some of the steps we may be able to take in order to release some of the restrictions that are already in place. But the important thing is that we're guided, as we have been throughout, by the facts and by the scientific advice that we receive.
The facts and the scientific advice we receive. Now, of course, there are hundreds of scientists and doctors who have a very different take on it and don't approve of the lockdown. Why governments don't listen to those scientists? Well, we might come back to that. Now, the government is being criticised for not briefing the media on its discussions on how to end the lockdown. Remember last week we talked about this? Remember the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, on Nick Robinson's Today Pro. Well, Nick Robinson is one of the presenters. Hancock was on BBC Radio 4's Today programme and basically condemned the BBC for asking questions about the ending of the lockdown. It was a startling thing. We talked about it last week. Public are a bit too thick. We don't want to confuse the public. So we won't let them in on our discussions on how to end the lockdown. So Sophie Ridge says to Michael Gove, OK, you cannot tell us when we can start getting back to normal, but can you give us any clue about what will happen when we do? Michael Gove.
Entirely understandable, of course, that there should be a public debate about how we approach these difficult choices. But the most important thing to do is to make sure that we proceed in a way that's guided by science. And one of the things that we need to have are all the facts, all the data in front of us to know what would be appropriate to do and at what time. So the steps that we've introduced have been determined by the advice that we've received from the Government Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies. And they and others are looking at the facts that we have now. And it's on the basis of those facts that we will then say what we believe is the right process and the right timescale for easing these restrictions. And I appreciate, obviously, that if we're thinking in due course of particular settings coming back and operating, we need to make sure that those settings have time to prepare. Absolutely. But it is also the case that we need to make sure that when those settings do come back, whatever the appropriate area of our life, our public life it is that has the restrictions eased, it's also important that we bear in mind what the new situation might be in those settings, because one of the things that we've learned from this new and deadly virus is that after we ease restrictions in some areas, there will still be a need for discipline in others, and we need to make sure that the approach that we take is informed by the science, and that the measures on social distancing and on protecting individuals, particularly public sector workers, are appropriate.
Yeah. So the Sunday Times says that Boris Johnson was asleep on his watch back in February, that he missed key Cobra meetings, and that he didn't take it seriously, the virus. And because of that, the situation is worse than it ought to have been. What does Michael Gove say to those charges in this morning's Sunday Times? This is a story which is a bit of nonsense, really, but it's, the mainstream media does what the mainstream media does. It's a tool of diversion and distraction. Its big deal today is this idea that Johnson was flapping around in February and didn't really take things too seriously, missing meetings, right? That doesn't mean anything to us, but let's have a listen to it. Here's Michael Gove with his response. Was Johnson arsing around, Michael?
Totally wrong. The point, I mentioned earlier that the Sunday Times story had one or two off-beam elements to it. This, I think, is the one that's wildest off-beam. The idea that the Prime Minister skipped meetings that were vital to our response to the coronavirus, I think is grotesque. The truth is that there are meetings across government, some which are chaired by the Health Secretary, some which are chaired by other ministers, but the Prime Minister took all the major decisions. And I think anyone who considered what happened to the Prime Minister just a little while ago, nobody can say that the Prime Minister wasn't throwing heart and soul into fighting this virus. His leadership has been clear. It's been inspirational at times, and I think that actually nothing is more off-beam than the suggestion that the Prime Minister was anything other than energetic, determined, focused and strong in his leadership against this virus.
OK, strong words there from you, Mr. Gove. Thank you very much for being on the programme.
Strong words, Mr. Gove. Give me a break. Right. Just for balance, and we'll leave this alone, here's Labour's Jonathan Ashworth. He's the Shadow Health Secretary.
I mean, look, none of us expect the impossible. We understand that mistakes will be made in a crisis of this nature. But there are serious questions as to why the Prime Minister skipped five Cobra meetings throughout February, when the whole world could see how serious this was becoming. And we know that serious mistakes have been made. We know that our frontline NHS staff don't have the PPE, that they've been told this weekend that they won't necessarily have the gowns which are vital to keep them safe. We know that our testing capacity is not at the level that it's needed. We know that the ventilators that many hospitals have received are the wrong types of ventilators. And there are big questions about as to whether we went into this lockdown too slowly. And now we hear the Prime Minister missed 5 meetings at the start of this outbreak. I mean, it suggests that early on he was missing in action. So we do need to understand what was going on. And it's not good enough for the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster to say, 1 or 2 points were off beam. People deserve an explanation. And it's disappointing, I'm afraid, that Michael Gove wasn't able to give a full explanation a few moments ago.
Come on, look, we know that Boris Johnson is as useless as a knitted condom, right? We know that he's as useless as deodorant is to a cab driver. But short memories here, media, short memories. Back in February, the scientists in this country, the ones who now are singing Armageddon every time they're on telly, back in February, they were saying that this wouldn't be any big deal. But the media wants you to forget that, of course. They all changed their tune at exactly the same time, didn't they? Nobody seems to think about these things. Here's the front page of The Observer. Don't bet on a vaccine to protect us from the virus. And that's from a so-called World Health expert called Professor David Nabarro. He says the world shouldn't count on a vaccine to help manage the coronavirus. Now, there you are. Don't assume that it'll work, he says. Good man. Sunday Express, hard work is paying off. The paper says that there is hope that we're getting through it because of everybody's hard work, because of us staying home, and because of those on the front line. They love this term front line. It's everywhere. It has been for weeks. The front line, this war terminology that they're using to create a paradigm, really. Creating a paradigm, giving people this idea, this notion that they're at war. Right? Sunday Mirror, doctors fear we will run out of oxygen. This is apparently a claim by 500 doctors that oxygen supplies are running really low at the moment. And the Sunday People alleges that NHS workers are suicidal, some of them, and scared to hug their children because of the infection, etc. Here's an interesting one. Sir Jeremy Farrar, who got mentioned on this programme last weekend, Sunday View last Sunday. He's a government advisor, and he was a prophet of doom. But he said this morning on Sky News that the lockdown does have to end soon, citing mental health issues as he did so. Here he is, Sir Jeremy Farrar.
It's clear that the lockdown can't go on for much longer. The damage it's doing to all of our health, our well-being, our mental health, it's disproportionately, of course, affecting the most vulnerable and the least able to, with resilience in society. That's a really big issue of inequality. The lockdown is damaging business, and ultimately that's damaging all of our lives. So the lockdowns cannot go on forever.
Can't go on forever. I made a sharp cut there. They can't go on forever. But apparently they will. We're going to hear more about this in a minute. Apparently they will. There will be intermittent lockdowns. So you'll have a lockdown. Then you'll have a little bit of freedom for a bit. But not kind of the freedom that you thought you had before coronavirus. You'll have a little bit of freedom. Then you'll have another lockdown. It's mad, isn't it? Hi to Base Ninja, who's told us that he went out 4 times yesterday. Go on, son. Straight away I'll be on to the old bill after this programme. It's absolutely, West Midlands police to come out and say 2,000 calls yesterday. And I know what people are like. You can imagine the calls, Hello? Is this West Midlands police? It is, yes. And you'll have people asking him, listen, is hot cross buns and scones, is that an essential item? Is it? Right, okay. Same person ringing him back a few minutes later, asking him is something else an essential item. People twitching their curtains and taking notes about their neighbours, eh? I guess I suppose there are people who probably thought, even people who use the independent media for some of their news. You use the independent media as a source. I bet you most people never envisaged that. You never thought you'd be in East Germany in the 1950s. Hitchens said it, didn't he? To be fair to Hitchens, he said this, Peter Hitchens, by the way, Sunday Mail on Sunday. And he's got a piece in the Mail on Sunday today, which is very interesting. Again, Hitchens did say this weeks ago. He said people will be happy to cooperate. They'll be all too willing to score social credit. Ding, 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 ding. There it is right there. Social crediting. People all too willing. Not just because they can't stand their neighbours. Because they don't talk to them. Because they don't know who they are. Don't know their names. Which is the case for most people these days. Unthinkable! When I grew up in Ballybeg in Waterford City. Marvellous place to grow up for a child, Ballybeg. Great place, great people. Working class community. Unthinkable that you wouldn't know the people living around you. their names, their children's names, that you wouldn't be doing things for one another. Hey, Richie, we're heading off for the weekend. Will you mind the house for me? Keep an eye out for me, will you? Will you turn on the sprinklers in the garden? Of course. Unthinkable back in the 80s, when our front door was never locked. Honest to Jesus, Mary and Joseph, the front door was never locked. My grandfather lives in St. John's Park in Waterford City. And it's a big housing estate, St. John's Park. John's Park, as we call it. Great place. Right? Great place. Great schools there. Again, working people, the salt of the earth, right? My people. And you'd go out to my granddad's, and the key would be in his front door, because he didn't have a handle. The key. So anybody who wanted to come in, any of his neighbours, would just go into the house. That's the way it used to be. It's unthinkable now. Unthinkable. You tell some of your neighbours now, if you're old enough, the way it used to be. I remember people just walking into my living room when I was living in Ballybeg in the 80s. Walking in, neighbours, just walking in. How are you? They would walk into the hall and tap on the living room door and open the door. No such thing as ringing the bell. They would walk in. And it was great. Not anymore. We don't know our neighbours. Our neighbours are competitors. There are people to compete with. There are people that we must be better than. We must imagine that we are better than them. We must frown on everything they do. We must be jealous and petty. What we must never do is embrace them and get to know them. And befriend them. Make them feel welcome in your home and you welcome in their homes. God forbid, you see. Oh, God. Let's have a bit of music. And when we come back, we're going to hear an astonishing interview on the Andrew Marr Show with a vaccinologist from Oxford University. To keep us somewhat sane, here's the great Satchmo with a beautiful song. Good morning from Salford in Greater Manchester. My name is Richie Allen.
Renowned healer Mark Byersky travels the world to find the most unique and powerful crystals for self-healing. Since the ancient times, crystals have been used as healing tools. They hold a natural healing vibration and are highly charged in positive energy. Mark teaches how to channel the universal energy and transfer it to the crystal to activate its healing power. Each crystal is used for its unique ability to target a different physical or emotional challenge. Mark Byersky is an author, healer, speaker, and founder of the Pure Energy Healing Academy. He shares powerful messages of inspiration and healing on his daily YouTube videos, reaching millions worldwide. Mark's crystals, healing oils, and incense sticks are most sought after by other healers. His collection is available online at www.markbyersky.com. His work is presented through Lemon House, a company that creates and curates consciously made gifts.
Thanks to you, The Richie Allen Show is the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. Show your support for this unique broadcaster by making a regular financial contribution. Just the price of a cup of coffee each month will make a massive difference. Visit richieallen.co.uk for details.
Right, it's 11:30, or it's just gone 11:30 here in the UK. Good morning to Philip Mills. How you doing, Philip? He says his little girl, Emily Grace, is 12 today. Happy birthday, Emily Grace. What a lovely name, by the way. And she's struggling with spending it without the rest of the family. Oh, that's a shame, that, Philip. It's funny you said that. I've met one or two in recent days, parents and grandparents whom at the moment are missing their children for various reasons. So you have my sympathy there. But if Emily, I'll have to mind the language now, won't I? If Emily Grace is listening, happy 12th birthday, Emily Grace. And many more of them, kid. Hopefully this will be over real soon and we'll get back to some semblance of normality. Thanks for that, Philip and Emily Grace there. Hi to Tom, who says, Richie, haven't we suffered enough as it is without this one world concert? Yes. Yes. Hi to Steve James. All good, he says. Stockholm Syndrome psychology in virus form. Thanks, Steve. Good morning to Gail. Good morning to Stuart. To Charlie G, Charlie Girl. How you doing there? You well? To my mate Colin in Dublin. Good morning, Colin. Diagwita Cora. Hope all is well there. Tosula Gum. I hope. What's the rest of that? I'll have to think it out. My Gaelga has deserted me. Hi to Stefano. Thank you, Stefano, for supporting the Richie Allen radio show. I really appreciate that. Hi to Charlotte and Burnley, to Alan Badger. If I leave anyone out now, it's not deliberate. Hi to Susan. Hi to Felipe. To Maverick. How you doing, Maverick? Hi to David or La Antenna. And we'll keep on going, will we? We'll keep on going. If I didn't give you a mention there, 'tis not. Because I don't like you. I don't see all the tweets, you see. 27 minutes to the top of the hour. Now, this is very important. Wished. Hey, wished. There you are. It's been a while since I said wished. And when I did, I got emails from all over the United States of America. I really did. From second generation. From people whose parents emigrated to the United States. Plenty of emails I got from people who said, Richie, wished. God be with the days wished when I would be told to wished, which means be quiet. Andrew Marr, BBC One this morning, The Marr Show, interviewed Sarah Gilbert, a person of importance, because she is Oxford University's top vaccinologist, right? Éistigí means listen up. Bit of Irish language lessons today for you. Éistigí, listen up. So, Sarah Gilbert on Andrew Marr, Oxford Uni's top vaccinologist. Question 1 from Andrew Marr to Sarah was, is it possible to get a vaccine this year? Please God, what did Sarah Gilbert say?
No, nobody can be absolutely sure it's possible. That's why we have to do trials. We have to find out. I think the prospects are very good, but it's clearly not completely certain.
And to get the vaccine to a stage where it is absolutely safe, you have to do a lot of trials, and that can take some time. Where on that process have you got to?
We haven't immunised anybody yet. We are about to start clinical trials, we hope, towards the end of next week. We are waiting for the final safety test to be done on the vaccine and the final approvals to be given. But in the meantime, we've been given permission to start recruiting volunteers and explaining the process of the vaccine trial to them, to take blood samples from them, to check their health status before we recruit them. And so by the time we have all the approvals for the vaccine ready, we should have a good pool of volunteers to draw from, and we'll be able to get going quite quickly. And so if all that goes well, and fingers crossed, when might it be ready? Well, it depends what you mean by ready.
What an answer that is. I mean, I had to rewind that when I was listening to it. It's pretty straightforward. How could you mean anything else other than ready? When will it be ready, love, you know? Well, it depends what you mean by ready. There are a lot of complex... Very important, this. Complex stages in vaccine development. First of all, we have to immunise healthy people between the ages of 18 and 55. We're looking at the safety of the vaccine as we go. We have used this type of vaccine many times before, so we're not expecting any surprises with this. It has a very well characterised profile of what happens to people after vaccination. They may have the usual things that you have after vaccination, your slightly sore arm, maybe a slight fever for a day or two, but that's all expected. And we will then increasingly immunise more people. We'll go into older people. We'll start to look at the safety and the immune response to the vaccine in older people as well as younger people. She keeps on the theme of the old. We need to protect the old, she says. And that's important because it's the older population that we really need to protect with the vaccine. But for vaccines in general, you get not so good immune responses as the immune system ages. So we need to find out with this vaccine how good it's looking in old people compared to younger people just by measuring the immune response to the vaccination. And we're also going to be looking to see if the vaccine works to protect people and stop them getting infected. And the way we do that is that half the people in the trial will receive the coronavirus vaccine and half of them get something else. It's another vaccine that's licensed to protect against meningitis. And people don't know which vaccine they're having. And then over time, as people become infected, they all have symptoms of coronavirus, they will come to us to get tested, and we'll arrange to have them tested very quickly. And when enough people have
become positive for the coronavirus, the statisticians will look at which groups those people were in to find out were they in the group that had the coronavirus vaccine or are they all in the group that had the meningitis vaccine. And obviously we're hoping for the infections only to happen in the meningitis vaccine group. And if
they must have warehouses full of meningitis vaccines that they don't know what to do with, right? That's what I would have thought.
Group. And if that's the case, we will then be able to say that this vaccine works, at least in the age range that we've vaccinated, and we can then start expanding the studies, and we can start to apply for emergency use licensure. So
what was that last bit there? This is really important.
At least in the age range that we've vaccinated, and we can then start expanding the studies, and we can start to apply for emergency use licensure so that the vaccine can be used more widely.
Emergency use licensing. And this is where indemnification comes in. When Bill Gates was on BBC Sunday Breakfast programme last Sunday, he suggested indemnifying the companies who make the vaccine for coronavirus. So they'll be immune, no pun intended, to prosecution if they cause great harm in people. Emergency use license. And that's really important. Now, I know I do this every weekend, but I know that the programme is popular. It's a popular radio show, and there are people listening to this increasingly for the first time. All the time, as time goes on, new listeners joining. So listen up. Andrew Marr has just committed a crime there. He's committed a crime on his radio programme, in my opinion. As a qualified, successful, award-winning radio producer, he's committed a crime there. Because when she's talking about emergency use licensing and all of that, it's incumbent upon Andrew Marr to say, let's talk about the swine flu vaccination if you don't mind, Professor Gilbert. Of course, she'd have a fucking heart attack. Sorry, Emily Grace. She'd have a heart attack if he said, let's talk about the swine flu vaccination, which gave people nerve condition problems, narcolepsy, night terrors and hallucinations. It destroyed people. The swine flu vax. It did. Don't believe the BBG either. Look it up for yourself and see what it did to people. She's talking about getting this vaccine emergency use licence to get it into frontline NHS workers. Just ask the NHS workers who got the swine flu vaccine how they feel about that. Andrew Marr is a criminal. I'd have been fired. In my time, I'd have been fired for not mentioning that to her. Right there. Hold your horses there, love. Before we talk about rushing a vaccine into people. What about swine flu? No, Andrew Marr, eh? We'll give him another pass. We'll blame it on the stroke. But, he asks a good question here. And it opens up a can of worms. And it's an important question. Listen to how unhappy she is that he asks it. Great question, this. On far.
It does sound to me from what you're saying that it's very unlikely that this vaccine would be ready for the wider population until the end of the year or thereabouts.
It's very difficult to predict, and there are two parts to that. One is demonstrating that the vaccine works. That's going to be affected by how much virus transmission there is at the time that we're doing the testing. So obviously we're seeing a drop in hospital admissions now, probably a drop in virus transmission in the community, and that's great for the population as a whole. It makes vaccine testing more difficult, though. Because we need a small number of people to become infected, and it is really a very small number, in order to know that the vaccine's actually working. We need a situation in which some people could have been infected, but they weren't, and other people who had the other vaccine were infected. And so that might take a long time if there's not very much virus transmission. The other part is having enough vaccine ready to use. So in parallel with the clinical trials, what we need to do is start preparing to manufacture large amounts of the vaccine.
Right, that was a generic question, generic answer. I got my clips in the wrong order. This is where Andrew Marr asks the vaccinologist a really good question. I'll get it right this time. And she ain't at all chuffed that he asks it, and you can hear it in her tone of voice. And I'll tell you why in a minute. This is a great question. Listen to the answer.
A straightforward question. Who owns it?
Yes. What a question.
A straightforward question. Who owns it?
Listen to her answer. Oh, she's not a happy bunny.
That's not really a very straightforward question. At the moment, the intellectual property is owned by Oxford University Innovation and a spin-out company from the university, Vaxitech.
Vaxitech. I want you to keep Vaxitech in your minds. She mentions it's owned by the university and a spin-out company, she says, called Vaxitech, right?
A spin-out company from the university, Vaxitech, under the terms of the founding agreement for Vaxitech. That's now being consolidated into a single body. The discussions are underway at the moment. For the moment, though, what we're concentrating on is having vaccine available for public health use.
Yes, let's move away, Andrew, from any digging down into the companies around Oxford University. Let's avoid that. That's not what we're concerned about here, Andrew. We're here to talk about how we can get everybody on the planet vaccinated. Vaxitech, she said.
Use. The university isn't looking to make any money out of this. The university is looking to protect people's health and to do that as widely as possible across the world. It's not just for this country. We need to make vaccine for the world.
For the world! Her demeanour changed pretty good. It's pity you couldn't see it as it was happening on telly. She looked like a bulldog chewing a wasp when he said, who owns it? Vaxitech. And I'll tell you why she looked like a bulldog chewing a wasp. This is where the BBC is incompetent, impotent, and totally illegitimate as a news channel. Before putting her on the Andrew Marr show, if I was the producer, what I would have done before putting her on is I would have spent several hours looking at her, the University of Oxford, and the other groups, like Vaxitech, the one she mentioned, who they are, what they do, so that I would be able to arm my presenter with some pointed questions, some sharp questions that he could then put to her. But the BBC is impotent, it's incompetent, it's useless. Marr is a failure in every sense of the word, right? Vaxitech will own the vaccine. Let me tell you about Vaxitech. Its main backer, Vaxitech, is GV. Now, you might not know what GV is. You will when I tell you that GV is basically Google Ventures. It was known as Google Ventures. They shortened it to GV because they don't want people to think of Google. This is true. Now, GV or Google Ventures is basically the investment arm of Alphabet Incorporated. It's very important you know about that and know about them, right? What does Alphabet also own? Well, Alphabet also owns DeepMind Technologies, which is an artificial intelligence company. Yeah. Their stated goal is to solve intelligence. To solve intelligence. And to get machines learning on their own without any input whatsoever, even from the get-go. They basically want machines to procreate and replicate with no human involvement. These mad bastards. Owned by Alphabet, whose investment wing is Google Ventures, right? Which owns Vaxitech. You couldn't make it up. So, DeepMind claims, wait for it, I'll tell you what, we'll leave DeepMind for another day. It's owned by Alphabet. One of Alphabet's key people is a guy called Eric Schmidt, who's a Bilderberger. He's an annual attendee of the Bilderberg conference. So look along the chain, do the maths, join the dots for yourself. This is basic shit that a BBC researcher could have done in 3 minutes. Vaxitech, huh? Oxford University, huh? Vaxitech is owned, or it's not owned, excuse me, its main backer is Google Ventures, which is owned by Alphabet, which is all about artificial intelligence. And Eric Schmidt and the Bilderberg Group, these are the people that have been written about for years in books by researchers. These are the people behind the desire, the stated goal to immunize every human being on planet Earth and to give them digital tattoos. Don't believe me? New York Times, look it up. Look it up. Washington Post, look it up. It's all there. Back in December of last year, these companies said, we've nearly got it ready now. A vaccine that can be tattooed onto somebody using what we call nanotechnology. And somebody can be read. They can be read then, you see. They can be read using a smartphone or a tablet. These are the people behind it. And she's sitting on the BBC saying, you know, getting a bit tetchy when he asks who owns the vaccine, because there's a yellow brick road there if you follow it, and it goes to DARPA and to DeepMind. It's disgusting. I feel justified every time I say the BBC is a clear and present danger to your health, to your life, and to the lives and health of your family and friends. It's disgusting that they could bring her on that programme and leave her away with that. You know? More from Sarah Gilbert. She's got loads of vaccines for us coming down the line.
We also want to work to look at the assessment of other vaccines which are in development, because it's my belief that quite a number of the vaccines in development will work, and they'll use different manufacturing facilities, and that's another way of getting lots of vaccines available for lots of people. In the long term, it may be a commercial product, it may be sold in future years, but that's not something that we're really thinking about at the moment.
Indeed, there are two things I think that come out of that. First of all, if this works, it's a British invention. Does Britain get it first before anybody else? But second, if it works and the whole world is watching what you're doing, do you think it should be made freely available to the rest of the world?
As I said, we're working on this as a public health project. So we want to make it available across the world, and we want to be able to make it available at a price that everybody can afford. It's not a particularly expensive vaccine to manufacture. We have to understand how we can cover the costs of manufacture, but then we need to make it available in large numbers of doses across the world.
Yes, and that's going to cost each country billions of pounds. It's not very expensive. Each dose of it isn't very expensive. Economies are destroyed because of the lockdown. Destroyed, right? Millions of people are going to be out of work. Billions and billions, if not trillions, around the world borrowed from central banks to help, allegedly, to help small businesses get back on their feet or survive the recession. And then you'll say to each country, the World Health Organization will, you've got to get this vaccine into nearly all of your citizens. Billions more. Now, I know the money is the least of it. I know this. I know it's the least of it. Don't get your knickers in a twist. The stated goals, and they are stated goals, these transhumanist things we talk about, you know, merging people with technology, the Internet of Things, a smart future. Yes, of course, that's where it all ends, really. But of course, along the way, bankrupt the world, bring in a crash that was unimaginable. That is unimaginable. Something that makes every crash that went before it look, like I said before, look like child's play. Yes. Isn't it wonderful? Where are you getting this? You're only getting it on this programme and one or two other programmes, really. This level of research in detail. The world doesn't know this stuff. And it's never going to know. Google, DARPA, DeepMind. Now, the BBC will do everything in its power, as will Sky and Channel 4, to make sure that the ordinary British man or British woman never ever learns about these companies and their links to British academia. And when that needle point goes into your child's arm, Mum and Dad never knows the chain that led up to that needle being stuck into that kid's arm or backside. Never know. DeepMind, artificial intelligence, DARPA. Fucking hell. Eric Schmidt, the Bilderberg group. It's true, every word of it. It isn't conjecture. I'm telling you the truth. People will never find out. They won't. This time next year, this programme won't exist. You know me. No fear porn here. I don't ask for anything. I'd be staggered if in 2022 I'm allowed to do this programme in this country. The way things are going. Not just me, others as well. Coming down the line. Because we're the last. It's the last refuge where you can talk about this stuff. Not anymore, though, because this stuff is going to be labelled hate speech by the very same people. They're going to say it's hateful and harmful to talk about DeepMind and DARPA and Regina and Google and Eric Schmidt and all of that. No, that's not true. That's a wacky conspiracy theory that's harmful. So we have to stop him saying that. No, I don't say it. I'm just a presenter. Ordinarily, one of my very fine guests would be on talking about this stuff. But I know, I've done my own research. I know where it all ends. Imagine it. Unbelievable. And as you know, the World Health Organization has been saying how wonderfully handy it is for them that they think that people won't build up immunity to coronavirus. That if you have had it, you won't necessarily have natural immunity against it. And that you might be infected again and again and again and again and again and again. This is a point that Andrew Marr raises with the immunologist, the vaccinologist from Oxford, Sarah Gilbert. Here it is.
Can I ask you a few things about it, so from what you know at the moment? Is it possible, do you think, to be reinfected after you've been infected by coronavirus?
Well, we can't say for certain with this particular coronavirus, but from what we know about other coronaviruses that infect humans and that infect animals, we know that immunity isn't very long-lived. So I think it probably is likely that if somebody's been infected, they will be able to be reinfected in the future. We don't know at what interval yet. Possibly a number of years. We'll just have to wait and see.
So this is a vaccine you'd have to use again. You'd have to, as it were, like a flu vaccine, you'd have to go every winter and get it again, probably.
Well, there's a difference between immunity acquired after natural infection and immunity acquired after vaccination. They're not necessarily the same thing. The coronavirus itself is very good at not leaving a very strong immune memory behind it. That's why people get reinfected. But we're not using the coronavirus itself as the vaccine. We're using a different virus to make a vaccine. And with the adenovirus that we use to make the vaccine, you get strong immune responses and they stay at a high level for a long period of time. So we could be in a situation, which would be very fortunate, we could find that the vaccine-induced immunity lasts a lot longer than the infection-induced immunity.
How long do you think, maybe this is an impossible question, how long do you think the vaccine-induced immunity might last?
Well, it is an impossible question. What we've done in clinical trials of our MERS coronavirus vaccine, though, is looked at people's immune responses a year after we vaccinated them, and they're still very strong then. Now, we don't know how strong they need to be to protect people from infection, so there's a lot still to know.
Yeah, and we just better be on the safe side, and just, as Mar said at the very outset of that question, of that clip, well, we'll have to have our coronavirus vaccine every year, won't we? Alongside our flu vaccine and God knows what other vaccines we'll have to take in the near future. Without which we won't be able to function as human beings in the way we previously functioned, which is just going out and about. You know, going to visit your gran in your gran's house, going to visit a care home where your great uncle is, going to the beach, going to see a show, going to the local theatre. No, you'll have to have your vaccine passport. Again, not conjecture, not conspiracy theory, fact. That's why I said at the very beginning of the programme, we are now living our lives, we're living in an episode of The Twilight Zone or Black Mirror. It's here now. The things that we watched while we munched on our popcorn, the science fiction theatres, science fiction TV programmes, the films. We munched on our popcorn and we were thrilled by these films that looked at a very bleak dystopian future where people had very little civil liberties and weren't very free. And maybe we went to bed after getting home, having our little nightcap, and maybe we thought, Jesus, sure, it'll never get to that. You're here now. You're here now. The police are telling people, we don't have the capacity. Stop ringing us and hanging your neighbours out to dry because you think they've gone out too much today. Who the fuck could have imagined that? Saying it out loud leaves me incredulous. Ringing the police to tell them you think your neighbour has been outside too often today. I mean, and here we are. I had some more audio for you. of a man from the British Chambers of Commerce saying that we're fucked. So I won't play you that, because I've just synopsized it. I've summarised it in 2 words. So I won't play you that. I'll play a tune and I'm out of here. I'm back tomorrow night, Monday at 5 o'clock with a show you have to listen to. Everybody in the world should hear it. Samantha Baldwin will join me tomorrow to tell her incredibly true story. And if you put Samantha's name into a search engine before she comes on tomorrow, you'll learn about what happened to her and why she made national news headlines only a few years ago. She joins me tomorrow, and I have a packed week of guests like Sherry Tenpenny will be on, Judy Mikovits will be on the programme, lots and lots of interesting people this coming week on your Richie Allen radio show, which is live from Salford in Greater Manchester, Monday to Thursday at 5 o'clock and Sundays at 11. Thanks for listening today. I'm going out with the Carpenters. Look after yourselves. See you soon. Bye now. Bye.